Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
The
my
leader is
name-
facing the other way.
We're going to get started. My name is Jeremy Rosenshine. I'm doing open book today. I am a Romemu member, and so I'm very excited about today and to be doing Parashat Shavua. Today we're going to start with the blessing for learning. Okay, Batya, we're going to start. Okay, together. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now.
Okay.
Okay. So, this week's parasha, Batya, we're going to get started, Batya. We're going to get started. This week's parasha is Parashat Shoftim, Judges, and it's a fascinating parasha. We're going to delve into the language and try and interpret it. And so what I'm going to do now is start with a little bit of an overview of the weekly portion, and then we'll get into some text and interpret it. It's actually a really exciting text. Okay, so here's what's happening. Moshe makes a speech to the Israelites, telling them to appoint judges who are required to judge the people with justice, to not distort justice, to not accept bribes, because that will blind the eyes of the wise. Okay, bribes blind the eyes of the wise. It's full of rules, so I'm not going to talk about all the rules that are in the weekly portion, but I'll talk about the ones I want to talk about today that I find really interesting. So here's the first rule. If you find, the Israelites are instructed, if you find a person who does evil in the eyes of God, you have to make a careful inquiry. If it turns out to be true what that person did, according to 2 or 3 witnesses, that person is required to be punished. Moshe goes on to outline a structure for government and the rule of law. So they're about to enter into the promised land, and Moshe says, we're not just going to enter in, we need structure, we need governance. So that's what this weekly portion is about. It's about the structure and the governance. He goes on to say, when you come to the land to dwell in it, you will want a king. Set a king that God will choose. The king must not have many horses, nor too many wives, not too many wives for the king, nor amass silver or gold in excess, so that his heart will not go astray. The king must read and study. How beautiful is that? The king must be a reader and a studier, and must study these rules that Moshe is reciting, so that he may learn to fear God and not lift himself above his brethren. Goes on to say, the portion, when you dwell in the land, you shall separate out 3 cities, sanctuary cities, that shall serve as refuges for murderers, people that have killed. These cities are only for murderers that kill their neighbor unintentionally. So the rules about homicide, whether the homicide was intentional or not intentional. And we'll see why that's relevant soon. For someone who is killed intentionally, the rules say, he must be returned to the actual victims and the witnesses and himself be killed. That's pretty extreme. So what's happening here is the parasha sets the foundation for what is today, until today, the approach to the Jewish approach to tzedek, to justice. It found its foundation here. Today we'll discuss the scope of justice. The word in Hebrew is tzedek. We'll discuss the scope, what it actually means. We'll go through some text to see what it means in this parasha, but also what it came to mean later. And as we do that, I ask you to think how the word tzedek, justice, has evolved over time. And these questions of what tzedek means are as relevant today, over 3,000 years later, than they were then. These are the question of justice and what tzedek means are very relevant today. So let me start here. The first passage is from the parasha, and I'll read it in Hebrew and then in English. I'm going to move this. It says, "Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha bechol she'arecha, asher Adonai Elohecha noten lecha לשבטך, ושפטת את העם משפט צדק. לא תטה משפט, לא תכיר פנים, לא תיקח שוחד, כי השוחד יעוור עיני חכמים, ויסלף דברי צדיקים. צדק, צדק תרדוף, למען תחיה וירשת את הארץ אשר אדוני אלוהיך נותן לך. You shall appoint magistrates, judges, and officials for your tribes in all the settlements that your God Adonai is giving you. And they shall govern the people with due justice. You shall not judge unfairly. You shall show no partiality. You shall not take bribes, for bribes blind the eyes of the discerning and upset the plea of the just. And here is the most famous sentence: justice, justice shall you pursue. In Hebrew, it's tzedek, tzedek tirdof, that you may thrive and occupy the land that your God has given you. So what the rabbis are completely occupied with, and everybody is why it says in the Hebrew, tzedek, tzedek, justice, justice shall you pursue. Why doesn't it just say justice? It says it twice. And that has, as they say in Hebrew, become tilei tilim shel parshanut. There have been scrolls and books about why the word justice appears twice. Now you could say it's just for emphasis, but as we'll see, it's not just for emphasis. This has become the bedrock of what justice is. So as we go through these texts, ask yourself, and I'll ask you all soon, why justice is said twice. I'll say something else. So let me just go back up to the Hebrew here, just so you see the root. Tzadi, Dalet, Kuf, Tzedek. That word tzedek, justice, on the screen up top here, means all kinds of things. It means justice, first and foremost. This is at the top of the sheet. It means righteous, tzaddik, righteous. A righteous person is a tzaddik, the same root, from justice, righteous person, tzaddik. It also has come to mean charity. Tzedakah, charity, but we'll see there's a twist there. It means justification. Tziduk, if I am right, I am tzodek, I am right, I am just. So that beautiful root has become, to me, is really the root for so many words. Okay, so one more thing, tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice, you pursue. Pursue is a good translation, but it's not good enough. Because the word tirdof in Hebrew doesn't mean pursue, it means chase. In other words, if you want to use the word pursue, it really should say justice, justice, you shall tirdof, you shall chase. In other words, this is really a hot pursuit. The level of pursuit here in Hebrew is really chase it with vigor. It's really a hot pursuit, and that's really important to remember as we think about what the parasha is saying. Okay. So now we're going to go on and read a little bit more from the parasha. And I'll read this in English. And these are part of the rules of how to administer justice. So this is Deuteronomy 17:8-11. If the case is too baffling for you to decide, referring to the judges, be it a controversy over homicide, civil law, or assault, matters of dispute in your courts, you shall promptly repair to the place that your God Adonai will have chosen. That's Jerusalem. And appear before the Levitical priests or the magistrate in charge at the time and present your problem. When they have announced to you the verdict in the case, you shall carry out the verdict that is announced to you from that place that Adonai chose, observing scrupulously, key words, observing scrupulously all their instructions to you. You shall act in accordance with the instructions given you and the ruling handed down. And here is the important line. You must not deviate from the verdict that they announce to you either to the right or to the left. So what we're reading here is that the judge's ruling, and this is an appeal, this is like a court of appeal. If you don't know what to do, you go to the high court. You go to the Levites, the folks in Jerusalem, and they, whatever they rule, you cannot deviate from that left or right. Okay, we'll read. Okay, I want to read one more. So, this is also from the parasha, Deuteronomy 19:11-21. If, however, a man who is the enemy of another lies in wait and sets up the victim and strikes a fatal blow and then flees to one of these 3 refugee towns, the elders of his town shall have him brought back from there and shall hand him over to the blood avenger to be put to death. Wow, how extreme is that? You must show him no pity. Thus you will purge Israel of the blood of the innocent, and it will go well with you. You shall not move your neighbor's landmarks set up by previous generations in the property that will be allotted to you in the land that your God Adonai has given you to possess. A single witness may not validate against an accused party any guilt or blame for any offense that may be committed. A case can be valid only on the testimony of 2 witnesses or more. If someone appears against another party to testify maliciously, so if somebody gives malicious testimony and gives incriminating yet false testimony, the 2 parties to the dispute shall appear before Adonai, before the priest or magistrates, in authority at the time. And the magistrates shall make a thorough investigation. And here's the punchline. If one who testified is a false witness, having testified falsely against a fellow Israelite, you shall do to the one as the one schemed to do to the other. Thus you will sweep out evil from your midst. Others will hear and be afraid, and such evil things will not again be done in your midst. Nor must you show pity. And here is the most important line in my mind. Life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. So if we step back for a minute, and we've been given, Moshe has given us these rules, given the Israel these rules, what is the nature of everything we have read? So I want to pause here and just ask people very briefly, and please keep your responses brief, is what is the nature of the tzedek, the justice that we are reading here? That's one. And 2, keep in mind, again, the question, why is tzedek, justice, appearing twice? Tzedek, tzedek. So again, we're going to try and answer that question, why tzedek appears twice, justice appears twice. But what is the nature of the justice that we are encountering here? Anybody in the room want to kind of give a thought here? Okay, and if you could go ahead, Tony, if you keep your answers brief.
I was actually waving.
Oh, waving. Okay. Anybody else want to?
But mirroring comes to mind.
Mirroring, symmetry.
The mirror.
Sorry for interrupting. Could you speak more into the mic, please? Thank you.
Yeah, that's you. Okay.
Symmetry or mirroring seems to be central here.
Symmetry.
An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, whatever.
An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Okay. Any other thoughts of what?
To what point? Why would mirroring be important?
So the question is, if you didn't hear that, why would mirroring be important here? Is the question.
It's some form of fairness. It neither exceeds nor reduces what the offense was. It seems somehow dare I say, just or fair.
Just or fair, and mirroring symmetry. Okay, let's go ahead.
In regards to the justice, it feels there's two different types of justice that we're talking about here. We're talking about the justice of the legal system, but also the justice of straight up morality.
Morality, the legal system, okay.
Yeah, so it
Okay.
feels like there's two separate justices, so say it twice.
Okay, so you said two types of justice.
Yes.
Morality and justice, okay.
Yes.
Two types of justice, okay.
Yeah.
You wanted to say?
I wanted to comment on the last sentence.
You need to speak to the.
Sorry. I wanted to comment to the last sentence where it says eye for an eye. This was never literally done in this with the Sanhedrin. In the Talmud, they realized that, like, if I injure you in a manner, if I injure your eye and you cannot sustain your family, you can't work or whatever, if you take out my eye, what does that do for you? Nothing. And so in the Talmud, the rabbis of the Talmud said that you have to give monetary compensation,
Okay.
so that if I cannot earn a living because I lack an eye, you who remove my eye needs to compensate my family financially
Okay.
for that. And so that the literal meaning of this was not ever actually done.
Okay, let's keep going here. I see Beth, you've raised your hand, go ahead.
Yes, pursuant to what Tony said a minute ago with regard to the mirroring, I think I read somewhere that we have something called mirror neurons, where we replicate the emotions of other people. It's like you see someone crying and suffering, and you feel tears welling up in yourself as well. And I think maybe the tzedek is a parallel for life, tooth for tooth, that we want to be proportional, and we also want to recognize what's going on in the perpetrator. DeBarty.
Okay, thank you for that. Go ahead, yeah. Yep.
I wanted to say that what Tony said about mirroring, I agree, but I'm interpreting as they're not two sets of rules, one for morality, one for law. It's being very specific. It says it twice because it doesn't want you to think too much about all the other things. Why did this happen? How did this happen? It should be different generations. It's very cut and dry. So people should think a little bit before they act.
Okay, and that's very consistent with what we read here. If somebody is murdered, you send him back so that he can be killed. The text that we have read so far talk of strictness. There is an extreme strictness. You follow the law. The whole notion of, they say in Hebrew, leman yiru ve'irau. If you see that somebody else was punished, and that's what it says here, you will be afraid. There is a definite strictness about this. An eye for an eye. You did that, you'll get an eye, you'll give an eye back. There is a strictness. If somebody escapes and he murdered intentionally, he will be returned and murdered. And that is the nature of this, the origin of this, the way I read it and the way the rabbis read it, is about strictness. So we're gonna read on and see what happens. So Richard, I see that you wanna say something. Go ahead on the screen.
Thank you, Jeremy.
And you're still on mute. Go ahead. If you could say that again, Richard.
Thank you. I saw a commentary from the Sfat Emet that normally the term rodef, pursue, has a negative connotation. We speak of someone being a rodef after honor. Someone who's a aggressor or persecutor is termed a rodef. The only other place the word rodef is used in the Psalms is, I put it in the chat, Psalm 34:15, Bakesh Shalom V'Rad Fehu, seek out peace and pursue it. And here it's seek out justice. He asks, is it not strange to find the Torah using this harsh term in connection with justice and the Tanakh using it in connection with peace?
Right, I think that's a good point. I think in both cases, Richard, what is common is the hot pursuit. And what matters is what you're pursuing. You could pursue evil aggressively. You could pursue peace aggressively. You could pursue justice, tzedek, aggressively. It's the verb of really chasing something as opposed to just kind of being passive and letting it happen. That's what rodef actually means. Okay, I'll take one more question from Brenda and then we'll keep going.
So it seems to me that this is these kind of fair or harsh or just punishments are about deterrent. So you that's the way you're going to remove evil from the world. You're going to people are going to realize that if they do these things, they're going to be punished. They're going to be punished harshly, and therefore they won't do it. So it's supposed to be deterrent to keeping evil out and righteousness in.
Right, and in that regard, I think what we're hearing, based on this extreme interpretation, tzedek, tzedek, justice, justice, is an emphasis. You know, you really have to adhere to whatever justice is or else. Okay, now let's keep reading. I'm going to go to the top of the next page, and just this is a summary of Telushkin. Telushkin describes an eye for an eye. And says, in actuality, the biblical standard of an eye for an eye stood in stark contrast to the legal standards prevailing in societies that surrounded the ancient Hebrews. The Code of Hammurabi, which predated actually the Torah, legislated retaliation even against innocent parties. So, thus, if A constructed a building for B, and the building collapsed and killed B's daughter, then A's daughter was put to death. That's Hammurabi law number 229. So here comes the biblical law of an eye for an eye, actually restricted punishment solely to the perpetrator. In the Talmud, an eye for an eye was understood as requiring monetary compensation equivalent to the value of an eye. The only punishment that was not converted to a monetary fine was capital punishment for murderers. So when we read an eye for an eye, at first blush it sounds like, oh my gosh, that's strict. But actually, as we heard here, the Talmud actually says, no, an eye for an eye compared to the other legal systems that were out there, when something happened, you would send the whole clan and then they would destroy the whole village. Here, an eye for an eye should be read as a measure of what is permissible and what is unpermissible. So it says, wow, when I read it today, you know, you say an eye for an eye, that's extreme, but really an eye for an eye was a boundary around justice. And it was converted to, the Talmud converted it to monetary damages because the person could die if you took their eye. So really what's happening here, this is a justice system that is, we're seeing some leniency. It's not as strict as it apparently was. We're seeing some relativity, some leniency around that. Okay, I want to read a little bit more, and then we'll take some more questions. Let's keep going here. We'll come back to some questions. Okay. So I'm going to read. This is Sanhedrin 32b6. As it is taught in Baraita, when the verse states, justice, justice shall you follow, one mention of justice is stated with regard to judgment, and one is stated with regard to compromise. So justice is one tzedek and law, and the other justice is compromise. How so? Where there are two boats traveling on the river, and they encounter each other. If both of them attempt to pass, both of them sink, as the river is not wide enough for both to pass. If they pass one after the other, both of them pass. In other words, one of the boats has to yield. And similarly, where there are two camels who are ascending the ascent of Beit Horon, where there is a narrow, steep path, and they encounter each other, if both of them attempt to ascend, both of them fall. If they ascend one after the other, both of them ascend. In other words, there's a recognition here later that you can't be completely strict about the deen, about the tzedek, the law. You have to compromise. And that's what's happening here. I'm going to read one more text. And then we get to Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, 118. Rabban, I'll read it in Hebrew because it's beautiful. Mishnah Avot Aleph Yudchet. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Al shlosha dvarim haolam omed, Al hadin, ve'al ha'emet, ve'al ha'shalom. שנאמר אמת ומשפט שלום שפטו בשעריכם. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel used to say, on three things does the world stand: on justice, on truth, and on peace. As it is said, execute the judgment of truth and peace in your gates. So this is 800 years later, Pirkei Avot, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. This is 800 years later after Moshe gave his speech. And we're seeing that the standard is a little bit different. So let me open it up there and see if there are any thoughts about this. Batya, go ahead.
Where does the compassion enter in not an eye for an eye, something that's not that precise, one person against the other, or toward the other, but in other cases, where does the word compassionate judgment come in?
Okay, so I'm not sure I have an answer. In other words, I do think, compassion is, I think we're seeing the compassion in how the law, the tzedek, has evolved by not adhering to strict punishment. In other words, the text that we just read, and Caroline, I think we lost it on the screen here.
Oh, I stopped sharing it because since we're like going around the room, like for the people
that's
online.
fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. Okay, so Batya, to answer your question, the text we just read, okay, Pirkei Avot, it says, in English, it says, on three things does the world stand: on justice, that's the first, okay, on truth, and what is that telling us? Justice, if you compare justice to truth, are they the same? Not necessarily, but the third one is on peace. And when I read peace, I actually think of, maybe compassion. In other words, justice isn't always going to cut it. You have to let compassion in under the circumstances.
I'm thinking of this pharaoh.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else? Go ahead.
This is a terrible thing to say. I apologize in advance. But in the original Bible that we read.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Go. Just hold on one second.
Whoops,
You can
okay.
repeat your apology
All
first.
right. Oh, definitely. Okay. Well, I've got a lot of chutzpah saying this, but we're all sophisticated. In the original Bible, Moses himself kills a man. He is judge, jury, everything, and knows he made a boo-boo, and he runs away, and that's where he meets his father-in-law. There is no reference to this in the subsequent story. Several books of the Bible later, Moses is explaining how the court system is going to work, and this is a bit, to me, it's a bit awkward.
So let me
Inconvenient truth.
let me offer a thought though. Isn't it exactly for that reason that Moshe is saying, okay, enough of this chaos, maybe myself included? If once we go into the land of Israel, we need government, we need law, we need structure. Maybe it was in response to exactly that kind of problem, which I think is very advanced.
Yes.
Okay, let me take Usher Chaim. Your hand is up.
Thank you. It's precisely to Rachel's very incisive question that Rabbi Tali Adler from Hadar wrote a brilliant essay a few weeks ago about the relationship of Moses to cities of refuge. Because Moshe may have been defending the life of the Israelite who was being attacked, but he certainly killed somebody. So even if it wasn't cold-blooded murder where a court would put him to death, nevertheless, there was blood on his hands. And in future generations, someone with blood on their hands who was not a cold-blooded murderer would end up in a city of refuge. So that's part of how Moshe, according to Rabbi Adler, may be preparing future generations to deal with this guilt that he still holds for the non-ferocious homicidal killing that he'd carried out. Dibarti.
Shamati, יפה מאוד. Okay, David Kurtz, go ahead.
I was just going to say, after Moses, we certainly have the example of Pinchas, who took judgment into his own hands and was rewarded for it. I raised my hand before, but wasn't called. The eye for eye thing, I always want to note that it's not arm for arm, leg for leg, it's eye for eye. And there's so much ocular business in Torah. Behold this, behold that. We've come out of so much of that it's interesting. I mean, don't believe your lying eyes can come into this. So I think that's part of what's justice, pursuing not just what you see, but the truth in that.
Yes, thank you for that. Okay, I see in the room here, go ahead.
I don't think that I have anything nice to say, but I am no short of outrage about. A little louder for the. I am no short of outrage about the whole issue about justice and truth. Peace aside, I don't think humans have any level of justice. Doesn't matter how much we study. It doesn't matter in what religion we study. It's a fiction. I come from a trial just weeks ago on my housing.
On what?
Housing. So,
housing.
And we
Yep.
just touched here on something about if a building falls, and I've been defending my family and my 6-year-old daughter so that our building doesn't collapse. And my career is architecture, which I spent it in the infrastructure of this city for everybody's service. And I don't think there is any justice. And the Justice Department and the justice system is a joke. And then truth. If there are 8 billion people here, there are 8 billion truths on this planet, because everybody has a different perspective. The reference of an eye for an eye, I believe is deeper than what we touch upon, because it's on each person's perspective, each person's vision, which is completely unique. No two lives are the same, no two experiences are the same, not even twins. So the only thing here that comes closer to me to existence is peace. Other than that, I mean, I don't want to speak more because there's more to be studied, but this whole thing is much deeper than we
and I think,
like to see it.
I think that's very valuable. I think you kind of hit on some really important points. I think one of the things that we're seeing here about Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the fathers, is that justice isn't clear-cut, it's relative, and you can't administer justice in all cases because sometimes there are underlying circumstances that require peace. And this is the story of the two boats. In other words, if you just follow justice, it's just not going to work. And so the need to compromise, the need to look for the truth. Sometimes the rule of law, we all know, doesn't always make sense. And that's what's beautiful about this. And so I think there lies the answer. Tzedek, in this light, is read as two types of justice. There's tzedek, and then there's peace. There's the law, and then there's the compromise. It's the relativity of the justice, and the fact that it needs, in order so everybody can attain it, it needs to be kind of administered with compassion. Yes, go ahead, Tony.
What I'm struck by in this counterpoint between Jorge and Jeremy, Rabbis Jorge and Rabbis Jeremy, is how much and how much so many of us, most of us, are besieged by the evil of our times, to put it one way. Besieged, or let me just put it this way, a little more physics-wise. The chaos of our times, and you and other good rabbis present at least a semblance of order. So order and chaos are warring in our world at this point on these fronts and other fronts. And I think somehow we need to honor and do justice to both of those big voices, the besieged voice and the voice that says, yes, but we're heading, or we can head in the right direction. Those two voices.
Yeah, very nice. Okay. I think we'll keep going here. I'm going to read, and Caroline, if you could re-share, that would be great. And
you share the screen?
Sorry, that's up to me. Okay.
Yeah.
Bear with me here, sorry. Okay, I'm going to read the next text. Shnei Luchot HaBrit on Shoftim 101. And again, these are all interpretations of why justice, tzedek, tzedek. Shnei Luchot HaBrit. Okay, justice shall you pursue. It says justice twice. The first is directed to the judges who judge in accordance with the Torah law. There is a second justice for compromise or emergency decrees. So Jorge, maybe they would have taken care of the house. That would be an emergency decree. I don't know what the circumstances were, but here you have emergencies that justify deviating from the justice, which are done occasionally by a prophet or a king in order for the world to exist. It's about existence. Therefore, the verse concludes that you may live and inherit the land which the Lord your God gives you. As the sages said, Jerusalem was destroyed only because they gave judgments therein in accordance with biblical law. In other words, this is a pretty harsh critique, is that if you just rule according to the law, it won't end well. There will be destruction. You need to deviate and compromise. Okay, I'm going to read another one. This is Rashi on Deuteronomy 16:20, and he says, justice shalt thou pursue. Go to or search after a reliable court. In other words, his interpretation is that it's the court that matters. The court has to be a reliable court. And then one more interpretation. This is Ibn Ezra, says justice. Moses speaks to the disputants. The focus is on the disputants. Moses repeats the word justice to indicate that one should pursue justice whether one gains or loses. Okay, that's what I want to focus on. In other words, tzedek is really saying two cases. You could win, you could lose. You have to accept whatever justice is. In other words, the focus is on the gain or the lose. You could win, you could lose, but if you trust your court, hopefully your court will give a just ruling, and you accept that. Okay, and that's his interpretation of justice. And I'll read just one more. and this is Ramban, says the reason for the doubling is to teach not only judges must pursue righteousness for the people, but you too must constantly seek justice. In other words, it's the judges, but it's you too. Tzedek, one justice for them, but it also applies to you. Okay, I see that Jill, on the screen, you have your hand up.
Yeah, you said something really profound, which is that because it's very confusing and profound to me that I think Rashi said that the temple was destroyed because people followed basically the justice system that God created. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Well, again, that's a pretty harsh statement, and I think the point there was, it's not that they followed that Jerusalem was destroyed because they followed the law that God created. I think the idea is, to me, that's really saying, look, you can't always follow the law to adhere to absolute strictness. You have to compromise. People realize there's the law, but within the framework of the law, you have to interpret the law in a way that works so that people can live. Otherwise, the realities will be too harsh. I think that's what it's saying. That's my read of it. It's not saying that it doesn't apply. It's not saying that it's not good, but you have to work within it, and sometimes you have to interpret the rules. I mean, the courts today do that. That's what they do. There is a relativity to the law, okay, that has to be employed for people to actually exist. That's my interpretation of it. Okay, go ahead, Paul.
There's a lady across from you.
You go ahead, and then Paul, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't see you, go ahead.
And that's why I said something, yeah.
Thank you. Well, I can't help but think this is reminiscent of Shakespeare's Measure for Measure, which is one of my favorites, and kind of piggybacking on what Tony said about a physical interpretation. I can see an eye for an eye as this, as having this cosmic function, as in every action has its equal opposite reaction, even to the point where atoms themselves, the energy that they exert and the pressure that they put on their environment is a measure of action met with reaction, which again is a foundation for entropy. And a lot of scientists will say that the world is existing in intense disorder, but I would say that we're quickly approaching order as it is, or peace. And so I have a somewhat differing realization of justice. I believe in it, that it may not be what we see all the time. There's always that popular opinion of justice, but we have no clue what's about each variable in any context or in any situation. And of course, the government, as it is, will always be faulty. It'll always be fallible, but the mother government that God oversees is what I see in every single moment.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Paul, go ahead.
Along the same lines, I am always attracted to the reality that we're dealing with Hebrew roots, and we know the root here as justice, but it could just as easily been righteous.
Morning.
And so that, to me, could be the point of repetition, is that the original creators, whomever they might be or whatever they might be, understood the different valences of these roots.
Okay.
And so it required repetition to emphasize the expansiveness of the concept that's being addressed.
So when you
here.
make that distinction between justice and righteousness, tell me about that a little bit. What would that look like? Yeah. Just what are you thinking?
Well,
how do they differ?
I think it's bounded at a minimum by what this table has been discussing, that we are specifically addressing the difficulties between distinguishing righteousness from what we come to think of as justice. And the audience of these writings could very well be, I mean, the immediate audience is not the people. The divine needs Moses to disseminate, but the words were created theoretically before. And so the audience is being intermediated through a elite that is seeing and mediating these words first. And the difficulties and the complexities and the subtleties and the expansiveness of all these words, understanding that it's going to be inevitably the elite that's going to be adjudicating, understanding the difficulties that existed back in the day, which are not different at all to what we are experiencing today.
Okay.
We want to understand how challenging it all is.
It is very challenging. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to take anybody on the line here. Actually, we're going to keep going just because I want to cover a few things. So Brenda, I'm sorry, I see your hand, but we're kind of running out of time, so we'll keep going. Okay, so let's go now to all right, so this is Rabbeinu B'chaye. Tzedek, tzedek tirdof. Righteousness, righteousness you shall pursue. According to the plain meaning of the text, the Torah warns by repeating that one must strive to be righteous both in word and in deed. These are two ways in which one may potentially inflict harm upon both oneself and upon others. Everyone who speaks righteously reflects the fact that his deeds are most likely righteous also. This is why it behooves every Jew to be both righteous in his speech and in his deeds. The sentiment is reflected in Tzfania 3:13 when he said of the remnant of the people of Israel that they shall do no wrong or speak falsehood. A deceitful tongue shall not be in their mouths. Anyways, the point is deeds and speech have to align. They both have to be right. That's his interpretation of tzedek, tzedek, justice, justice. And then here's one that I really like. I'm going to actually skip this one. Okay. This is one that I really like. Ramban, Introduction to the Mishnah, 14:6. As behold, when these honorable, pious, and magnanimous men, who were outstanding in their wisdom, saw that the words of the one who is in disagreement with them were better than their words, and that their investigation is correct, they conceded to him and recanted to his opinion. All the more so when other people see that the truth is leaning towards the one with which they have a conflict. Should such a one lean towards the truth and not stiffen his neck? And this is the meaning of the verse, justice, justice. In other words, I think this is like one of the most powerful verses in my mind. It's like, if you're arguing, it takes a really strong human being to say, you know what? I was wrong, and you were right. I hear you, and you're right. And that is a beautiful interpretation of justice, justice. I have my justice, but you know what? After hearing you, you shouldn't have a stiff neck. You should be able, and a good judge, I think, does that. You hear the person, everybody thinks, oh, that's ridiculous, that's wrong, but if you listen to that person, you should be convinced, and that's justice, justice. Listen to the other side. Okay, let me see, I had one more here. Actually, that was it for this. Okay.
Can I interject one thing?
I just want to give others a chance to talk. If there's anybody on the screen that hasn't spoken yet, I don't want to miss anybody. Okay, Brenda, go ahead. If you're still interested.
All right. So Justice, justice. I don't know if this is any rabbi's interpretation, but to me, there's two kinds of justice. There's the kind that you have in court, somebody's wrong, somebody's right, whether you have a harsh judgment or a compromise or whatever. But then there's the bigger justice, like there are hungry people in the world. Should we just take care of ourselves or should we try to feed everybody? There's injustices in the world that some people are oppressed. Should we, how much attention do we pay to that? How much, you know, isn't that it, that's justice also, that's a whole different, that's not outside of a court system. That's the
Absolutely.
broader sense of doing right by your fellow humans and maybe
Absolutely.
your fellow animals as well, really thinking outside of those limited boxes of what happens in a courtroom.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brenda. Tomas, go ahead.
Hi, I'm sorry I couldn't join you in person today. Just building, Brenda, on what you said, and also Rain on your remarkable evocation of contingency and relationality and complexity. The repetition of justice could also be because justice is one of those words that kind of is itself and its opposite in this context. Not injustice, but justice is an absolute, like there's a right and there's a wrong, and that's for sure. But also the idea that justice is contingent and relational and has to do with discernment, compromise, imperfect solutions, negotiation, everything that is the opposite of the absolute. And that to pursue it absolutely only or contingently only is not to pursue it at all, but somehow you need both. You need both of these seemingly opposed spirits. And then just to belabor the second half of the sentence or the final word, it's not justice shall you find, right? Or else, you've done wrong. It's justice you will seek. So I think there's a kind of a humility there and an acknowledgement that what we arrive at is always going to be imperfect this side of that mother government that Rain evoked, and that it's all in the pursuit and not always in the mere achievement.
Absolutely, Thomas. That's a beautiful point and a good summary. And one of the texts that I skipped over now says exactly that, is that even when you think you've achieved justice, no, you're not done. You got to keep going because you're never quite there and it always changes and it's always relative. And that's, thank you very much for that, Thomas. And I'm sorry, Tony, we have to keep going here. Keep going. Well, if we have time at the end, we'll circle back. Okay. So, all right, I want to shift gears a little bit. One of the words that derives from tzedek, from justice, is the word tzedakah. Right. Tzedakah. Okay, now, if you translate the word tzedakah, if I say to you, what does tzedakah mean? What is the resounding in English? What does it mean? Charity. Charity. Okay. Now, if I say to you, what is charity? What is charity? Charity is something that you give from the goodness of your heart. You don't have to give charity. You should. You want to. It's an act of kindness. I think the Latin for charity is like endearment or, out of dearness. You want to give to a cause that you care for. In fact, that's completely wrong in terms of the translation. Tzedek, tzedakah, and tzedek is justice. In other words, the Jewish interpretation, the biblical interpretation here is completely different. It's not out of the goodness of your heart. It's not charitable. It is, in fact, a tax. You actually have to give. You have to, under Jewish law, you have to give charity. So Deuteronomy 26, okay, says, when you have set aside in full the 10th part of your yield in the third year, the year of the tithe, and have given it to the family of the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, that they may eat their fill in your settlements. So the point is here is you have to give 10%. So under this is actually commanding. This portion is saying you have to give charity. And when you think of charity and you look at the root tzedakah, it's justice. In other words, it's not really out of goodness of your heart. It's a much stronger edict. It's the right thing to do. It's a command. It is justice to give charity. And if you understand that word, to me, it puts charity in a completely different light. It's not something that you kind of volunteer. You actually have to give it because it's the right thing to do. It is justice. I think that's really an important thing to remember. Okay, I want to speak about one more thing here. And another thing that we said is that the kings, Moshe instructs, he says there will be a king. But the king is not a normal king, okay, the way we think of kings. The king here is, and here's the guidance. The guidance is that the king, as I said, has to read these commands, has to learn, has to be humble. And so this is what Maimonides says about the king. Just as the Torah grants him, the king, great honor and obliges everyone to revere him, so it commands him to be lowly and empty at heart, as it says, my heart is empty within me, Psalms. Nor should he treat Israel with overbearing haughtiness, for it says, so that his heart may not be haughty over his brothers. So it's like one among equals, right? So he should be gracious and merciful to the small and the great, involving himself in their good and welfare. He should protect the honor of even the humblest of men. When he speaks to the people as a community, he should speak gently, as it says, listen, my brothers and my people, Chronicles. And similarly, if today you will be a servant to these people, he should always conduct himself with great humility. Was none greater than Moses, our teacher. Yet he said, what are we? Your complaints are not against us. He should bear the nation's difficulties, burdens, complaints, and anger as a nurse carries an infant. In other words, the king here is instructed to be humble, listen to the people. And that's why it says in this parasha, he shouldn't have horses. He shouldn't have too many women. I found that amusing. Not too many.
What's too many?
Three's enough. Three's enough, but not too many. The idea being is that this is in order so that the king will be humble and really be a leader with humility. Okay.
But not only that, but as a nurse carries her infant, which is a whole other deep maternal image.
Exactly. Okay. Any before we wrap up, any responses, thoughts here in the room? Tony, go ahead.
One hears about the Baal Shem Tov as a kind of king among kings in some deep way, that he who, in a kind of bodhisattvic way, to be a Jew-boo about it, so has perfected the power of listening the way that it is said of the bodhisattva of compassion, that literally the name, in one of the names in Asia is he who hears the cries of the world. When you come to that level of goodness, that goes way beyond rightness versus goodness. That's a level of listening that, frankly, could be said to redeem the world. And it is said of the Baal Shem Tov, that when he listened to disputants, everyone walked away feeling really good about the outcome. That it goes beyond the usual in the form of a Baal Shem Tov, the mother government steps forward. The underlying where compassion meets wisdom. Yes. And everyone walks away feeling really good.
Good. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, yes.
I wanted to make a couple of comments. Number one, in terms of the becoming a tzaddik, which is a righteous person, is the ultimate goal of all Jews. That you should transform yourself and educate yourself so that you are a tzaddik. And And traditionally, they say there's only, one tzaddik in a 70-year generation or something like that. So
Like
it's
the
a
Baal
very,
Shem Tov, for instance.
it's a very difficult task to achieve. And the other is in terms of giving tzedakah. It's in the Bible, it talks about everyone giving the half shekel. So regardless of how rich or how poor you are, it was the equalizer. Everybody gave the same amount of tzedakah, the half shekel, and in that, and
Because the giving is a value in and of itself.
right, and also in terms of the court systems, a Jewish court always has an odd number of judges. A bet din always has a minimum of 3 judges, always an odd number. So to get like a real truth, a real balance. And my last point is that in the Torah, it never, in terms of judgment and punishments, it never talks about prisons. Yet we know for a fact that prisons in multiple societies of the day existed. Famously Joseph being imprisoned in Egypt. And yet, in terms of punishment, the prison is never mentioned.
Okay.
And so being imprisoned is not a philosophy of the Torah.
Okay. All right, so I know there's a lot to say. I don't want to hold up people getting to services. So we'll take one more, and then we'll wrap it up. So, which one? Okay, go ahead.
I am purposely waiting till the end to say this because I know.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I'm purposely waiting to the end to say this because I know it'll make some people frustrated. But I do think that this is something we have to reckon with currently. Especially, I was reading some commentary on Shoftim, and I believe it was the Rambam, was talking about the importance of horses and why horses are mentioned and how it was reminiscent in Egypt of the time and currently how that parallels to war machines.
Yeah.
And I think that we as a people have to really reckon with what justice and peace means right now.
Absolutely, absolutely, and thank you for that. So I will just, in summary, I'll say this: like when the text starts out, it really reads as something extremely strict and binary. I think when you think about it and you read these other texts, it becomes, as many of us said, it becomes much more relative. Things like compassion, truth, peace, cohabiting have to come into play to administer true justice. And I think that that's the greatness of tzedek tzedek. That duplication of tzedek tzedek is really telling us, listen, there's not one tzedek. Tzedek has to be relative. And in many ways, it has to be relative. And so tzedek tzedek is a really important phrase. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, wrote a book by that name. And if you look up tzedek tzedek, righteous, just on Google, you'll see hundreds and hundreds of posters and buildings. And it kind of makes me pretty proud to know that it came from this parasha, and to this day, it is still leading us. So, thank you very much. And Shabbat Shalom.
Compassion and judgment. Prepare it.
All right, how are you?
Yeah.
Welcome